Hello everyone! In this lesson, we will use Webpack to set up an automated CSS workflow. Here's an overview for this lesson. First, we will go over what a CSS workflow even is, so we are all on the same page. After that, we'll have an idea of what we're trying to set up and why we're setting it up. So then we will be ready to actually add CSS support to our Webpack configuration. So let's get started from the top. What is a CSS workflow? In a previous lesson, I mentioned something named CSS Auto Prefixer. It's an automation tool that lets us write CSS like this and automatically turns it into this for us. Auto Prefixer can save us a ton of time, and we will be setting it up in this lesson. But even beyond Auto Prefixer, there are a lot of other things we wish we could do while writing CSS that we can't do because web browsers don't support it. This is where things like Sass or Less or Stylus come into play. If you've never heard of any of those, that's A-OK. They are tools that let us do some of the following things in CSS. So for example, maybe we want to save a certain hexadecimal color code of a blue shade to a variable named main blue, so that we can easily reuse that exact color throughout our CSS. Or maybe we wish that we could write nested CSS. So instead of writing CSS that looks like this, we wish we could write CSS that looks like this. But normally we can't do that because 0% of web browsers today support that. So tools like Sass and Less and Stylus let us write CSS the way we wish we could write it, even though it won't work in a web browser. And then these tools pass our code through a filter that spits out a new file. And in that new file, it automatically converts our code into regular CSS that will work in web browsers. So it's the best of both worlds. So in this course, in order to get all of those neat CSS features that we just discussed, we are not going to use Sass or Less or Stylus. We are going to use something called Post CSS. Post CSS is the trendy new kid on the block in the CSS world, but it also has the objective benefit of being the fastest to compile out of all of the CSS pre and post processors. All right, so now we have a general idea of what we want to do in this lesson. Now it's time to get our hands dirty and actually make it happen with Webpack. Now before we go ahead and start adding CSS support to our Webpack setup, let's begin by making sure that we even have a CSS file that we want to bundle. So right now, do this with me. Within our Travel Sites app folder, let's dig into the Assets folder. At the moment, it contains images and scripts. Let's go ahead and create a new folder named Styles. So I would right-click on the Assets folder and choose New Folder. And so we're on the same page. Let's name this folder lowercase styles. Okay, and then within that new Styles folder, let's right-click and choose New File. Let's go ahead and name it lowercase styles.css. All right, now within this brand new file, let's add a tiny bit of sample or test CSS, just so we will know when things are working. So let's target the body element, and let's just say body should have color orange. Let's go ahead and save this file. And now our first instinct might be to go into our HTML file and in the head section, load in this CSS file. And technically that would work, right? That would add this styling to this web page, so this text would become orange. However, that sort of a setup would not leave any room for an automated workflow. So what we actually want to do, and trust me, I realize how unintuitive or weird this is going to seem at first, but what we actually want to do is load this CSS file from within our main JavaScript file. First, let me show you what I mean, and then a bit later on in this lesson, we'll understand why we're doing this and the benefits behind it. So right now, do this with me. Within our App Assets folder, dig into the Scripts folder, and I want you to open up app.js. So up at the top, let's add a brand new line of code and type this in with me. Import and then a pair of quotes, and then within the quotes, we want to point towards our new CSS file. So // to go up out of the scripts folder into the assets folder, and then we want to go into the styles folder, and then we're interested in the file named styles.css. Okay, now go ahead and save this file. Now at the moment, if we tried to run Webpack, so tell Webpack to process and bundle this JavaScript file, it would run into an error. So we're not even going to try yet. It would run into an error because remember, out of the box, without any extra configuration, Webpack only understands JavaScript files, not CSS files. However, if we make a trip to the NPM grocery store, we can easily add CSS support to our Webpack setup. So open up your command line and then type this command in with me. npm install, and we're going to install two packages. The name of the first package is CSS-loader space. Okay, and then the name of the second package we want is style-loader. And then at the very end, add a space and type --save-dev. Okay, now that we've downloaded those two packages, let's go leverage them. So to do that, I want you to jump into your webpack.config.js file. Within this configuration object, we can tell Webpack what to do when it runs into certain files by adding a property named module. So down at the bottom here, maybe at the end of this watch line, let's add a comma, and then let's drop down and let's add a new property named module. So module colon, and then create a JavaScript object with curly brackets. Within the brackets, let's drop down. Okay, inside this object, we just need a property named rules. So type in rules colon, and then this is going to be an array. So square brackets. So within our array, within these square brackets, we can drop down to stay organized. And let's create an object here. So curly brackets. Now for the time being, we're only going to have this one object in the array. But the idea is that you can have multiple objects in this array where you tell Webpack to do something different depending on the file type. So right now we're interested in the CSS file type, right? We want to tell Webpack what it should do if we run into a CSS file. So within this innermost object that we've created, we're going to give it two properties. The first property is named test. So feel free to drop down in between these curly brackets and give it a property name of test. So test colon. And now we give this a regular expression, / and then a backslash, and then .css, and then a $, and then a / and then the letter I. Essentially, this is telling Webpack that within this rule, we're only interested in files that pass the following test, right? Only if the file name ends in .css. Okay, so if a file does end in .css, what do we want to do? Well, at the end of this line, let's add a comma, and let's add one more property named use. So use colon, and then this is going to be an array, so square brackets. Now this is where we can leverage those packages that we just downloaded from NPM. So remember, the first package that we downloaded was named, so quotes, it was named CSS-loader. So now I think you're getting the idea. We're saying only if a file ends in .css, only then would we want to use the CSS loader. Cool, so we have now configured Webpack to be able to understand and process CSS files. Let's go ahead and save this and test it out. So once you've saved this file, go ahead and open up your command line. And to refresh your memory, to tell Webpack to begin running, we just type in the command npm run dev. Cool, so at this point I have a bit of good news and bad news. The good news is that we did not run into any errors in the command line, meaning Webpack was not confused or upset that we imported a CSS file from within our JavaScript file. And if we take a look at the bundled file that it generated for us, so within our app folder, if you open up bundled.js, don't worry, this is an auto-generated file, so I don't expect you to be able to dig through the file and make sense of it. But if you press Control F or Command F to search for orange, right? Remember we added the CSS rule of body color should be orange. You can see that bundled in this file, right? So we successfully bundled CSS into this JavaScript bundle file. So that's the good news. The bad news is if you load up your web page and if you refresh, we still see the annoying alert pop up, but notice that the text is not orange. So even though we included and bundled that CSS, it's not actually being used in the browser. So that's the bad news, but I guess the second dose of good news is that that's very easy to fix. If we want to actually apply that styling in the browser, all we need to do is this. So back in our webpack.config.js file, within our use array, right? So we have the square brackets and then the quote CSS-loader. Well, right before this opening quote for CSS-loader, let's add a comma. And then before the comma, add another pair of quotes and type in style-loader. So CSS-loader lets Webpack understand or bundle CSS files. And then style-loader actually applies or uses that CSS in the browser itself. So with this in place, let's go ahead and save this file again. And then we need to open up the command line and tell the old instance of Webpack to stop running or to stop watching us. So press Control-C to quit that task. And then we just want to fire up Webpack again using the latest configuration. So just run npm run dev. And now back in the browser, if I refresh, so we still see that annoying alert, but if I scroll down to a bit of text, you can see it's orange. Cool, and because our Webpack is using the watch feature, if we go into our CSS file, so styles.css, and maybe if I change this color from orange to green and hit save, that's going to trigger a brand new Webpack bundle. So we don't have to do anything if we just go back to the browser and refresh. Cool, now the text is green. Now that we've confirmed that the bundled JavaScript file is loading in the browser, let's go get rid of this annoying alert message. So within our app.js file, you can just get rid of the test alert line. Cool. Now that things are working, let's take a moment to address why we're doing this, right? Why are we loading CSS from within our JavaScript? Well, actually, before we even get into the benefits or reasons why we're doing this, I want to begin by saying, don't worry. When it comes time to actually serve our website to the public, we will set things up so that our CSS lives in its own traditional separate CSS file that's included in the head of our HTML. So we will get to that a bit later on. However, during our development, right, while we're building the site, there are many speed and performance advantages to having our CSS handled by our JavaScript. For example, in a future chapter, we will set up Webpack's development server so that when we save a change to our CSS, we don't even need to refresh in the web browser. The new styles will just be applied without a refresh even on the fly. For now, let's not worry about that. So we need to walk before we can run. For now, it's okay that we need to refresh to see the latest changes. I just want you to see what we can look forward to in future chapters. The idea is that by letting Webpack handle all or as many of our assets as possible, we are getting many benefits in return. Anyways, back to the task at hand. At this point, we've added basic CSS support to our Webpack setup. Now it's time to add post CSS support. So in the command line, go ahead and stop the current task by pressing Control-C. Okay, and then let's download the post CSS loader for Webpack. So run this command with me. npm install. The name of the package is post CSS-loader. At the end, let's include --save-dev and push enter. Okay, now let's go leverage that package or loader. So jump back into our webpack.config.js file. And if a file ends in .css, we just want to use an additional loader. So at the end of this use array, right after these quotes for CSS loader, add a comma. And we want to add post CSS loader. However, it's a bit different. Instead of simply listing its name like we did for these two loaders, with post CSS, we need to give it a few options or plugins. Let me show you what I mean. So instead of just a name, we actually need to provide an object, so curly brackets, and then we need to give it a few options. The first option is loader, so loader colon, and this is just quotes and then the name of the loader. So post CSS dash loader, and then right after those quotes add a comma. We also need another property named options. So options colon, and then another JavaScript object, so an additional pair of curly brackets. And then within this object, we give it a property named plugins. So plugins colon, and now this is where we list all of the post CSS features that we want. This is because out of the box, post CSS doesn't really enable anything. It's sort of an empty canvas, and then it's up to us to load in whichever post CSS plugins we want. So right after plugins colon, let's create a variable that will be an array. We can name it anything we want, but just so we're on the same page, let's name it post CSS plugins. Towards the top of the file, let's go create a variable with this matching name. So I'm going to scroll up towards the top of this file. Maybe on line number 2, let's add a new line, and let's say const post CSS plugins should equal an array, so square brackets, and then we just list whichever plugins or features we want. Before we list any plugins here, let's go download the plugins. So in our command line, let's run npm install, and let's grab 3 packages. So the first one is post CSS simple vars. The second plugin is named post CSS nested, and the third plugin is simply named auto prefixer. Then at the very end, let's add save dev. Let's press enter. Okay, now let's list these packages within our array. So let's require in post CSS simple vars. After the parentheses, let's add a comma. Let's also require in post CSS nested, comma, new line. Let's also require in auto prefixer. Okay, now let's save this file and now jump back into our styles.css file and let's test out these post CSS features. Let's start with variables. Well, now creating a variable in CSS is as simple as just saying $, and then we can make up a name. Let's call it main blue, colon, and then let's say it has a value of £2F5572. Okay, and now let's imagine we want to use this exact shade of blue. So imagine we want to select a div with a class of large hero and style any of its heading level 2 elements and make them have a blue color. Well, we could write a selector like this, but while we're at it, let's also test out our nested CSS. So imagine we want to look within the div with a class of large hero, and then inside this, we can have another selector. So we could say heading level 2, give that its own curly brackets, and now we could say color should use $main blue. Now this code is absolutely not valid CSS, and the web browser will have no idea what this means. But because we have an automated workflow now, Webpack will create a file that the web browser does understand. So let's save this file, and then in the command line, let's tell Webpack to begin running. So npm run dev. Press enter. Okay, and then if we go to the web browser and refresh, cool. So if you scroll down a bit and find the headline that reads "one trip away," you can see that it is now blue. The fact that this is blue lets us know that we have successfully configured our post CSS plugins. And that brings this lesson to a close. Now in our next lesson, we will finally break free from all of these hypothetical exercises, and we will begin writing the actual CSS and HTML for the fictional travel agency website. It's going to be a lot of fun. This is where the course really starts to move at a much faster pace. I'm looking forward to building the site out together with you. We've come a long way so far in the course. We've learned about a lot of new technologies and tools, but at the same time, we are just now getting started. Let's keep trucking, and I will see you in the next lesson.